didn't quite get the number of people. But actually, if you look at what we've done and what we've found, I think we can all agree that urban agriculture is really important. We found some really important things about it. I'm thinking of Rusa's, spider diagram showing how sustainable it is. Anna's work, which obviously we've got to firm up. But if 50% of people report that an activity improves their mental health, if that was a tablet, you would be given it. Your doctor would just say, take this, don't argue. So that's really important. And one of the other things that's been really important in this project is talking to one another and, importantly, listening to one another. Actually, that's been one of the profound things of listening and talking. So I'm really pleased that we can have a panel that starts to bring that to a close. And I think we can all agree it's really important. I think what Sebastian's shown us is that policy people think it's really important. But then also we have to hold their feet to the fire a little bit and say, right, okay, we all agree it's important. We all agree it's good. How are we going to make this happen? And there's only so much researchers can do to make stuff happen. We can lead people, but we can't get too much further from there. So it's really exciting to have people who are making things happen join us and talk to us about their experiences. So I think we'll start with some introductions, and everybody can introduce themselves, and then we can maybe dive into some of the questions. So if you'd like to introduce yourselves and just a little bit about what brings you here today, I'd like to start with Steph.
So I'm Steph. I am from Bristol. I coordinate Bristol Food Producers, which is a network of local farmers, producers and businesses in Bristol working to upscale food production in and around the city. So my job is to work with the farmers to access land, training and markets.
Lovely, that's very pithy. Mr.
So Chris, or Christopher in Norwegian. I'm one of the co-founders of Dagens. We're an ordering platform between local producers and Bodega, so hotel, restaurants and canteens, no private customers. We've been doing that for over 4 years now. We're operating in Denmark and in Norway. In Norway, we have a better foothold than in Denmark, but it's I've been participating with how we see things, especially from the commercial private side, which is very interesting because we would love to and continue the collaboration between all parties.
Thank you very much. And Maria?
Yes, I'm Ellen Marie Forsberg. I think the public representative here this time. I've been working with urban agriculture at the county governor level, agricultural department since 2005. We saw very early that I worked with agricultural questions, and we saw very early that urban farming is a very interesting and important part of the agricultural field. So I suggested we managed to integrate this into our work, and I was one of the initiators to the report which Sebastian showed us from the county governor, and we also collaborated on the Kostaktion with urban agriculture. Sebastian invited me in, and we got a very fundamental and important idea about what is urban farming more than only growing. And I also have to add that when it comes to the national strategy, we were a little bit disappointed about the strategy from Oslo because it didn't, as you pointed out, take in the farms in Oslo. We have quite many farms in Oslo. But when it comes to the national strategy, I initiated also a letter to our bosses, the Department of Agriculture, and the model you showed with urban agriculture and different fields, I presented that model for the different departments to argue and make them to reflect that it's not only a responsibility for the agriculture department to work with urban farms, but also all the other departments, health, social, education, and so on. Sorry, that was
No,
very long.
that's really helpful.
So I'm going on. I'm working out the county with the business development, among others, within agriculture.
Thank you very much. Louise?
I'm Eloise. I'm from Bristol as well. So I work for Bristol Food Network. So we are a third sector organisation that exists to nurture collaboration across the whole of the city's food system. So not just with producers, with farmers. And we've kind of coordinated a number of projects over the years, some of which we've touched on earlier today around Bristol kind of developing resilience and sustainability of its food system, most recently to get our Gold Award, one of only 2 cities in the UK to get the Gold Sustainable Food Places Award. And I've just finished writing something that Dan mentioned, which is our framework for action on food for the rest of this decade. Well, I've written the document, but it's been produced with about 50 organisations in collaboration, and that has a kind of, Steph has led on the urban agriculture piece of that, and it's got a set of pathways for action for the decade across areas such as kind of eating better food, growing food waste, all the different areas of the food system.
Fantastic.
And my involvement was really taken in from my colleague Joy, who was initially kind of involved with this after meeting Sebastian a few years ago.
Yeah, a big fateful meeting.
Okay,
Yeah, brought us all here.
Yeah, indeed.
So Randall.
Yeah, Randi. I work in the farmers market in Norway, and I'm also a board member in the World Farmers Market Coalition, a very new organization where we meet colleagues from farmers market from over 50 countries in the world. And in Norway, we have been doing farmers market in 20 years. And the last years, we have also been involved in an owner of a very exciting project called In the Market Gardening in Norway. And Maria has been into it, and also other people here are participating in that project. And one of the reasons why we are doing that is because we want to work on this urban and rural link, because our markets is a meeting place for urban and rural people. And it's also a meeting place when it comes to this knowledge about food and the food production. And for us, it's been very inspiring to learn about this phenomenon, urban farming, and it's so many projects going on all over the world in different shapes and colors about it. But it's also important for us that the urban farming also is linked to the farms and to the farmers, and to make them and their knowledge about farming is still important, even though we can spread it also much more in the urban areas.
Fantastic, thank you. And last but definitely not least, Trond.
Hello. Well, proud to say I'm a farmer. The only one. I run a farm just outside Bergen, 20 minutes from the city center. Raise bulls, buy calves, and feed them up. And also have a few sheep. Yeah. I'm the 12th generation running the farm. Has been in our family since late 1500s. So we have a little bit of tradition too. And I really hope there's a future for farming in Bergen, because I have a son, and hopefully he will be the 13th and bring up the 14th and so on. Yeah.
No, that's great. You can tell us more as we get into this discussion. I think that would be really helpful. And I think that's also really helpful to think about what, on one hand, we're talking about innovation, we're talking about something that's changing very quickly, a lot of technology, but also we're talking about something that has a really deep history as well of people's connections with one another and the land. And so we're trying to balance lots of things simultaneously, which I think is part of what makes it exciting and what makes it, very powerful, but also makes it quite difficult. And I think that's the other thing. We shouldn't sort of beat ourselves too hard, because trying to do something new is always difficult, and we're going to fail and we're going to have problems and challenges. But, that's not to mean that we shouldn't be trying. So just to start with, we've identified this, tremendous potential, and some of you are already working with that tremendous potential. What's holding commercial farmers back? What is it that they find as a big problem in getting involved in urban agriculture from your perspective? So, just from what you see of it. So I try to be really unfair and pick on Steph to start.
So are you saying what's stopping the existing
urban farmers? Why are they not growing? Why not new people going, that's a brilliant idea, I want to be part of that?
in Bristol it's land. We have a real issue with access to land, both in terms of finding land. Land prices are really high, but if you're renting land, trying to find security of tenure, like we were talking over lunch about one of the farms that the group visited when they came over, there is a dairy operation that's 2/3 of their land is on a 1-year lease. It's not uncommon. Land is so difficult to come by, partly because of a loophole in inheritance tax. It's being bought up as an investment, and so people that's why the price is so high. But it means it's out of reach for new entrants. You're coming in as a new entrant, you can't afford to spend the money to buy it. You can't find land to rent. So in Bristol, the council own quite a lot of land, but the council have also had no resource. Their budget's been cut and cut and cut over the years, and so their land hasn't been managed very well. They don't really know who's on the land. People probably don't know if they're paying rent or not. Is the land being utilised to its full potential? So I've been working with the council to try to change all of that and try to open up their land, because it's such an opportunity, especially for a new entrant, to come in, have access, even if it's only for a few acres, to set up a market garden. But yeah, I think that and access to skills, we have in the UK, you can't go to an agricultural college and learn how to become an organic farmer. You can learn to go and drive a tractor and spray the chemicals, but there is not any standard training to get into organic farming. And so a lot of people go and do an unpaid traineeship on a farm where they live in a caravan for a few years, and then they come back and they try to set up their own operation. So those are the two biggest barriers that we have.
Fantastic. No, and I recognise that picture of, there's a high barrier, isn't it, to train by living in a caravan and being very poor.
And there's no funding when you set up.
And then somehow magically, some magic beans that you found in that 2 years set up the business.
It's amazing that anybody does that.
That's a more positive and amazing story, isn't it? That anybody manages it.
Determination.
Yeah. Christopher, from your point of view, because in Dargans you play a very particular role that you might want to explain a little bit more, but what's the break upon people getting involved?
Yeah, maybe I can start on elaborating what we do. So we always say that we're an ordering system. So we're one of these new players, platforms to make it easier for producers and chefs, for restaurants and canteens and shops to buy from each other. Local trade has always been done. My grandfather in the north did local trade. He bought from local producers and sold it as a wholesaler. We've forgotten this, at least that's how I see it. We've forgotten this the last 50 years because everything's been so convenient, right? So what we do is we offer the digital infrastructure between producers and buyers. Related to your question in terms of the main challenge that we see, one is the big players, right? They control everything and they're what we call vertically integrated. They own everything from producers to distribution. So for a producer, large or small, where do they start? how do they actually get in and get access to this? And that's for sure in Norway. Also, we see that in Denmark. Pretty sure the same as in the UK. We actually was introduced by staff to meet local farmers in Bristol, and the challenge is the same. Where do you actually enter as a local producer in your local market, right? So the value chains, supply chains in particular, by the big ones, are designed to handle volumes and not local produce, not specific, like valuable, and not seasonal produce. Everything is always in season, right? So yeah, so the infrastructure, both especially the physical, but also the digital, that's one issue. And then I would also say skills. For the producers who wants to sell directly, where do you start? Who do you reach out to? How do you reach out? And not only are you supposed to be a farmer or producer, but you're also supposed to be a commercial seller. How do you structure your sales organization? Do you call your customer once a week? Do you go out and visit them? How do you price your items? Right? It's these things that we talk a lot with our producer partners. We try and gather them on webinars or physically for them to discuss, but also for us to help them and develop standardized material.
That's really helpful. And I was going to ask Trond, as a recent new entrant of the 12th generation, do your farming neighbours kind of think that you're, how can I phrase this, mad? Or do they think you're like the coolest guy who's forging the future? What do your peers and neighbours think of what you're doing?
In the valley where I had my farm, there used to be 9 neighbors doing farming. There were nine farms in the valley. Now there's only me. That's the first. So my closest neighbor in one direction is 5 kilometers away, and the other direction is 2.5 kilometers away. Who's running a farm? So I teamed up with the closest one, and we started a company together, which is called in Norwegian Varhaga Matfadagen, which is the name of the mountain behind us. It was one of the mountains surrounding there. And we try to say it in another way. We have the same thoughts, and we found out it was much easier to collaborate than to be competitors. So we started this company. You mentioned the prize that was winning the prize, the food festival. And we are trying to build up a company which, in a way, are going to buy from local neighbors to produce and sell to the second largest city in Norway. We have a lot of customers in an hour from our shop. We have just over 500,000 people. So we think it's a good idea. We still hope it's a good idea, even if the bottom results they haven't been great, but we were able to make a surplus last year, second year. We started the company in March 2020. 7th of March. With a big party for all the chefs in town, which were all unemployed with the 12th. That was a Norway shutdown.
So it was either the worst time or the best time.
It was probably the worst time for Horeca to introduce yourself to restaurants and so on. They were unemployed for almost 2 years. But what we experienced, that was the amount of people wanting to buy local food and things locally expanded greatly because they were not going on holiday. So they spend more money on good food and garden things and materials from the local builder shops and things like that because they were staying at home anyway. Have their home office. So we experienced a massive sales growth. So kind of balance.
And that raises that really important point. And Randy, you were talking about that as a market, as a meeting place, you know, and people are going out and meeting Trond in his shop and on his farm. And, you know, Trond has very eloquently shown that isolation that many farmers have. So what is it that are bringing, you know, commercial producers to your farmers markets? What's the attraction there?
To get the attraction for the farmers. Yeah. Well, first of all, it's many of the farmers the early days they were very unsure about this. I mean, the idea of doing this historical way feels a bit old-fashioned, they thought. But then when they had been to their first market and they were experiencing that the people actually was very interested and they asked a lot of questions about the farming and how this cheese was made and everything. And the farmer was telling a lot about this and at the end of the day the farmer was smiling and saying, "This is actually the first time I've ever been proud of being a farmer." And that is of course also very important. He was respected for his knowledge and for all his work. And people were also paying the real price of the food. And the customers were just happy to get a very good product, and they were coming again the next week. So this meeting in the market is, of course, about food and about money, but it's also about sharing knowledge. And it's because the farmer also gets something more from the customer. The farmer also gets a lot of information about what kind of products is possible to sell and how do you as a customer use that product, because the urban customer maybe has other ideas about how to use this cheese than the farmer himself is used to from the old days. So it's also about sharing ideas when it comes to that. And it's also possible to come to the market with very small volumes. So you can test the two different sausages and you can talk with the customers about which one they prefer. And from that, it's easier to plan your production the next time. So it's really interesting. But of course, it's also a lot of work. And for some farmers, it's it also takes some time to get used to the selling of the product. And of course, you need to learn a lot about packaging and marketing and the selling. And it's a lot of work you then are doing yourself. So you get to pay for all that work, but you have to do it also.
Yeah, and that's back to those sort of, we were talking about skills, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Steph was saying, you know, there's a place you struggle to learn to be an organic farmer in the UK, but we're also then asking farmers to take on a whole nother set of skills, many of which, you know, up until now, life hasn't necessarily equipped them with. You know, they might be great at talking to their friends, but, you know, produce some strangers, and suddenly these very eloquent people are very quiet sometimes, and they've spent a lot of time working on their own. And now you want me to talk to random people who just turn up. And, you know, that's a whole different set of skills. And that feature of collaboration as well, I think that we touched upon, you know, Trond touched upon, and I think it's based upon a lot of what we're talking about. And I think in the Bristol Food Network, collaboration is the kind of the way in which the network works, isn't it? Can you say something more about, you mentioned that how you collaborate with these groups to produce the statement. How did that?
Yeah. So I think, well, if we take the urban growing one as an example, Steph can elaborate, I'm sure, and say anything I miss. We invited people who'd been involved in our work before initially, and then we kind of did a sort of a scanning of who else we should bring in. We're very focused on trying to be more diverse and inclusive in the work we do, so trying to get more community and grassroots voices in and more diverse representation of people. So we had people from various growing projects around the city, so people from community, growing grassroots projects, people who Avon Wildlife Trust, who do kind of connecting people with nature, but they also run a site that's for growing and about showcasing growing to the public. Who else did we have? Sims Angus, who's involved with Sims Hill. And people from the council, so the really kickstarting the collaboration with the council, which was really key because, you know, talking about collaboration for Bristol, as Steph touched on, that's kind of, they're the gatekeepers of kind of a lot of the issues for urban agriculture. So engaging them was really important, and that's been so successful. And the progress and the momentum and the buy-in within the council now to support growing in the city is really there, and they've committed to keeping and even increasing resources there. So kind of bringing people together, and we used a bottom-up process. So we kind of asked people what they thought the issues were, what they wanted to address, what they thought the opportunities were. And then we kind of overlaid it with, okay, well, here's some goals that Bristol's already set itself for its food system in various sort of strategies that have been set out. But we really tried to make it bottom up. There's also been work going on in the council to develop a new parks and green spaces strategy. So we've worked with them because they hold the key to what happens on public land in terms of growing. So kind of, you know, public parks and green spaces, not just.
And the small allotment and small holding strategy.
Yes.
As well.
Yeah. So that's being, there's a new, they're actually calling it a food growing strategy that's being developed at the moment. That will cover allotments and small holdings, and it will go out for public consultation. So that's great because it means that anybody in the city will be able to review and give input into that. And that feels like a really big deal, actually.
I think touching on the collaborative part of that, I think it's been really key to get different parts of the council to speak to each other. Because I think, I don't know what it's like here, but like different teams like work in complete isolation. So we have the small holding and allotments team, but they don't grant the leases. The assets team grant the leases, and the assets team don't want to grant a lease. So I can talk to the small holding and allotments team who say, yes, we'll give this lease on this bit of land to this farmer, but the assets team say no. So actually what I've had to do is get the cabinet member involved to put political pressure on the assets team to grant the lease to the small. It's incredibly frustrating, but what this framework's done is engage all those different parts of the council and allowed us to join those dots and connect those things.
And the other thing about this piece of work that we've been developing in terms of the collaboration is it's been kind of cross collaboration between different themes. So we've been looking at that systemic thinking and how urban growing has an opportunity to impact other areas of the food system in Bristol and vice versa. So, you know, connecting, I know obviously here we're predominantly talking about commercial growing, but thinking about how through the new food growing strategy, the allotment strategy, we can make sure that there's access for communities and people to grow in all areas of the city, and how that can enable more at the food justice piece, so more access to food for people, and also mapping land, available land for growing in the city, and again mapping where there might be an opportunity to start commercial growing that can supply really local businesses. So Steph's quite closely involved with a new enterprise in Bristol called Lush Greens, and they are absolutely focused on growing for their very near community, and they received some funding to actually grow for food banks, so where people who are suffering from food insecurity can go to get food free of charge. So yeah, the collaboration is about trying to make those links.
Lovely. Now, Steph asked a rhetorical question as to what it's like in Norway, getting policy people to collaborate with one another. Now, I don't want to get you into trouble, Maria. Anything you might like to say about whether that works well, or you could just ask me to ask another question.
But I have a question, because there was something about Food Policy Council. Yeah, I saw in your presentation. Does the food policy? Sorry.
No, you can't.
because we are thinking about starting a food policy council in the Oslo area. Yeah, outside Oslo actually. Do the food policy council has a role in this work you are doing?
Yes.
Does it help with to have a food policy council?
Yes, it's in a different guise. It's called so the original Food Policy Council has kind of been wound down, but it has morphed. It's transformed into what we call the Bristol Good Food Partnership, which is basically the key stakeholders who've been writing this framework for action that we've been talking about. There's a steering group and working groups for that, and that is now the equivalent of the Policy Council. The Policy Council in Bristol was the very beginnings through my incredible esteemed colleague Joy, who was first involved with Nibio. Her and some other people really created relationships with the councils and people who were invested in food in the council, and they formed that cross-sector Food Policy Council, and over time that's developed and broadened as we've gone through different projects. And I think the great thing is, as it's evolved and grown, it's become more diverse and more widespread. So, but yeah, I mean, we're really happy to kind of share learnings and
Perhaps the Food Policy Council is an answer on the question.
Yeah. And also, I was just noticing how it skillfully took you from having to answer my question. So it's that old trick of ask a question to get out of the question you didn't want to answer. So no, I'm just admiring your political skills. Do you want to speak?
Yeah, if possible, I would like to ask Steph, because she said that she had a hard time getting them to give the lease.
Yeah.
And I was just got a little hung up on that, and I was wondering, is that because there's a potentially much more financially beneficial use or economically valuable use? And that it goes on to another question, which is we've seen today that there are ample resources. So this is a little bit to the farmers as well, because I'm beginning to wonder, is there a lack of meeting points with those that have land, in Norway that is, and those that may want to use it? Is this something that if someone came to you and said, you have according to everything we can know of today, you have an amazing potential in terms of, going into urban agriculture. Would you think that was wrong for someone to say something about what you should do with your land? Or would you appreciate it? Is there a meeting point where resources and people that want to do something with those resources actually meet? So, yeah, but first, Steph.
So I think it comes back in Bristol, it comes back to the council not having the resources. So the assets team manage the leases for the buildings and for land, and they don't have enough staff to do it all. So they can spend time on putting together a farm business lease for a piece of land where they might earn £500 a year, or they can spend the same amount of time putting a business, like a building lease together and bring in like £50,000 a year. So they choose that. That's the problem that we have, because until our allotment and food growing strategy is signed off, we can't tell them what to do, or there's no guidance on how they should be spending their time, so they do the thing that makes the most money. But on the land thing is an interesting thing. So we've just done a pilot project where we brought together landowners and people looking for land, in Bristol, because the council land is going to take a bit longer and we still have lots of people looking for land. So we got some funding to run a pilot project where one of my colleagues spent some time going out and looking for landowners, and we also put a call out for people to come to us. And we've had a survey going for 6 years where people who are looking for land can fill it in. And then we have an event where we brought everybody together and we did speed dating where people could like move around and chat to people, and it was amazing. And so now there's been some national conversations about a national land matching service, which I hope might take off. But I think there's also a need for a local arm to that, because what my colleague was able to do with her contacts in Bristol, she was able to say, oh, I know that there's a horse riding stable who have 100 acres in North Bristol. I know somebody there, I'll call them. And oh, I know this person here, I'll ask this farmer if he knows any landowners around him. So that was about the reaching out, as well as, you know, if you just ask people to come to you, you'll get a small selection. But a lot of the time it's just saying to somebody who might own 200 acres of like, do you have 5 acres to support a new entrant to have that start? But unfortunately, most of the land we got offered was quite a long way from the city, and most of the people who are looking for land are in the city. So that is the major challenge. But I don't know if you have a.
I don't know if there's any official meeting place for that kind of questions. I don't think so. To have somebody, if anybody have an opinion on what I should grow, I really like to sign up myself. And to be honest, there's not much more than grass which can be grown on my farm. So in a commercial big scale anyway. Of course, small setup for potatoes and carrots, that would be a problem. But for commercial use, it's a grass culture. So,
That's really interesting, Trond, and I think really important, because I think conversations about change can be really difficult, can't they? I mean, recently in our team, we had a discussion about low carbon travel. Wow, that was exciting. And because, you know, it's okay for other people to change. Oh, you want me to change? Oh, that's a different story, isn't it? Because it's not just, you know, and I get to decide what I do. That's a really important part of who we are, isn't it? And if we're farmers, that's part of it. And also part of maybe your identity as a farmer is you get to decide what you do on your farm. You know, the handsome chap on Rose's slide, you know, clearly was very proud. You can see, this is it. This is my landscape. This is what I do. So when people come and say, I'd like you to change, you know, very often we say, tell farmers to change. But how do we have a dialogue about changing? And I think maybe Christopher has conversations with people about change, you know, in price, understanding their businesses, those kind of things. Can you say something about how you have that dialogue with people?
Yeah, if you start with the farmer side, it's well, one thing is the systems change on how they work with, like use a system like Dagens and use technology. Basically, it does not necessarily mean only Dagens. There are other ways and platforms to sell, but how they actually use it. That's one thing. And I mentioned also that the change from working with wholesalers in Norway. At least a lot of the channels are through cooperatives. You have Natura, you have Tina, you have others, right? That's the main channel. So if you want to go from the main channels to selling directly, how have the knowledge. But the biggest problem is actually on the chef side, on Bodega side. If you're a restaurant, how do you source locally? You mentioned like you have a Asian fusion restaurant. Can you actually use local ingredients? Yeah, there's a lot of, you can use chicken, you can use eggs, you can use a lot of vegetables. But how do you work with local producers? Because if you call Finn from Bergson in the God on Monday night, he's not going to come on Tuesday morning. The wholesaler will. But if you want to design your menu and your restaurant, your concept towards local and seasonal food, you need to change your way and spend a lot of time talking with chefs. We have chefs who call and say, like, yeah, I would love some some ramson or some cauliflower. Well, it's April. If you look outside, it's sneakers or snow. Where do you want to get it? From Italy, maybe. I think this mindset of having everything available throughout the year, it's hard. And we see it's a lot about information and knowledge. People forget everything is accessible all the time. So you forget it.
That's the same as we discovered when we were trying to sell to restaurants in Bergen. Because we, as small-scale producers, I produce about 10 tons of ox or bull every year. So, yeah, it's not that small, but it's still small and European. Yeah, but I also have some lambs, and we were trying to sell them to restaurant, the highest restaurant in Bergen, on the Mount Ulrika. And we have to tell them that if you are going to buy my lamb, you have to take all from tail to the mouth. You have to use the whole animal. You can't just take one part of it. The restaurant wanted just the leg of lamb, of course. And I said, well, yeah, then you take out all the valuables. And I'm stuck with the rest. What should I do with it? Yeah. So we managed to do that. They bought 50 lambs, I think. But it was I don't know the word in English, but it's educating the old ones, educating the chef. Yeah. And I also have a chef calling me up in April. I want suckling lambs. Yeah, it's about 14 days until they were born. Call me again at September. So, yeah. The problem is that he can pick up the phone and call Natura, which has them on the freezer. Yeah. And also the pricing. Just to say that the pricing I get from Natura when selling my lambs to the cooperative, the price on lamb just got up with 4 Norwegian crowns a kilo a week ago. I chased the lambs to the mountain on Thursday. So now the prices is the highest. And from here it goes just down. And what is that going to do with the producer? Yeah, we adapt. Yeah. We build big barns and get them born in December and feed them inside so we can adapt to the market. That's not sustainable.
And Sebastian was.
Yeah, I was more and more reflecting about another resource, neither the land nor the products, but I wonder whether it's also a lot about time and use of time. And I mean, we have the volunteers and enthusiasts who do not live off agriculture and production, but who have that as an interest and are willing to use any time they have left for organizing things and engaging and so on. And we have the ones who live of it and might want to have do some other things, as other people are allowed to do other things somewhere. And I think it was actually within this project that one of the farmers was quite critical to spending time on the farmers market, because it's more like, well, I'm not an entertainer. I would like to sell things, and on this, just as you said, it's not necessarily a sales platform. But so it was very interesting to hear how you said, yeah, well, they use it for testing, or it's a kind of a customer lab or whatever. And then I talked to a farmer last year whom I known for many years, and I knew every second week he drove 14 hours, 7 hours to Oslo and 7 hours back again to deliver his products. And then he suddenly said, No, I don't do that anymore. I use Dagens. So there's an enormous amount of time suddenly made free, which might then be used on building customer relations or other things. And yeah, it's I wonder whether it's a lot about trying to do things, smart, that they in a way fit to me as a person and my business. And it seems that the different ones of you have kind of different roles in a big time market for farmers and customers and others. Yeah. So,
Randy, you want to say something about?
Yeah, it's in the farmers market we have a lot of different farmers. Some of them sell everything they produce on the farm at our markets, and they have been building a big range of customers because they have been doing it for a long time, and they have been and they are doing very well. And other they are selling in different channels, maybe to Horeca and maybe also a little bit to the closest supermarket, and then they sell the rest at the market. So it's a very big difference between how they organize everything. But what we have seen in the last years is that a little bit, or some of the young people, they come to the market for the first time, and then they think that the first day I will sell a lot, and then if they don't sell a lot, it's like no, then we just test something else, and that's very interesting because then there is something they have not understood when it comes to you need to create a relationship with the customer. You need to be patient, and it will take time. So now some of the younger farmers are kind of shopping around, trying to see where can I sell my products in an easy way, with not spending so much time on it, and then failing because he's just testing too much instead of concentrating on doing a few things very well. So, and of course, it's not everyone who's doing that, but that is also some of the picture because whether you are selling to the restaurants or directly to the customer, you need to build this relationship to make it so the chefs has the right knowledge and are able to also say to their own people that we need to be more seasonal. We need to think about when is actually Trond's lamb down from the mountain. We need to do the planning in the menu when it comes to that, and also together with the customers in the farmers market. No, we don't have lamb now because it's May, it's June. No. Yeah. And that's so. My point is that one of the big things we need to work with, all of us in this, is that we need to make seasons great again, and that is common for Britain and Norway because we have these seasons, and we need to remind people about them and to help them understand it.
No, thank you. That reminds me of still this theme we have of skills. That actually selling things to people is about a relationship. It takes time. It takes time to nurture. I also remember when I was a lowly kitchen porter, saying to the chef no was really difficult. When you had an idea, going no, chef, was not something that you said really, or maybe more than once. And similarly with customers, we've got into this thing that the customer is kind of king or queen, and whatever they want, they will have, even if it's completely unreasonable, completely unsustainable. Somebody somewhere will find that pineapple from, wherever they wanted it from, a lamb in the wrong season. There's always something there. So there's there's that skills and collaboration theme coming through. Dan, you were.
I just wanted to say one more thing about the collaborative thing, and maybe also speak up a bit for more collaboration with researchers too. I mean, the reason for saying that is because, a lot of change is happening. We talked a bit about change. You were talking about changing consumers, changing farmers' attitudes, all these things. And I think we're facing a real urgency to change at the moment because of climate change and the other uncertainties that Sebastian mentioned. And I think that leads us to think about how we collaborate to agree what the change looks like. And what we've been doing among other people are things like climathons, because local authorities in Britain, probably here as well, have signed up to legally binding targets on carbon reduction. And they've agreed to commitments towards things called climate emergencies. They're legally binding now. But yet we've already heard from Steph that our local authorities at least have limited capacity to act. So it's more and more important to develop collaborative approaches to even picturing the future. So we do things like climathons where we work with farmers and say, well, the science says that all of this should not be barley. And they say, well, we've been keeping barley here since 1500 or something. How does that affect my identity, my place in the world? So we've got to agree that between each other. And I think, we've got some really interesting, I suppose, opportunities to challenge each other. National self-sufficiencies come in and out of mode over time, depending on how neoliberal we're thinking or how Brexity we've been, for example.
You lot.
Yeah. But then that, of course, cuts off reflections about really interesting urban agricultural work that's happening in the global south, where you've got huge patterns of rural to urban migration, which is problematic in a lot of different ways. But what is happening there in many countries is that people with really interesting and important agricultural production skills are coming to the cities and are informally using these to supply their households. And many city councils have been able to formalize that and to translate that informal use into formalized use because it supports the city's economy and it brings those people out from the slum edges into the formal economy of the city. So I'm just trying to say that there is an urgency that's happening all around us that's linked to climate change, but also linked to the commitments that many of us have signed up to and that are legally binding, that force us to make sure that the future is about co-agreeing it, not just about imposing it, I think.
And I'm also just thinking down of that super tanker of urgent issues that you've just kind of highlighted. And then say like Maria then has to pour all of those sort of huge ideas into a policy document. And I guess maybe this again might be an update. Are we reasonable about the limits of what policy can do? So, is it down to policymakers to sort of set a framework and say, do this? Or is it just for policymakers to suggest how the rest of us should go? How do you see the role of policy in shaping what we do next?
I see it in, it's complicated. I'm an anthropologist.
Okay. Shall we talk some rituals?
I have a comment. In the previous life, I was a political scientist, and I think it's really useful to remember that still in this day and age, the most powerful driver for change is public opinion. And I think of the farmer, the rural dwellers, and the urban dwellers as a dysfunctional marriage. Because they're really married to each other. The people in the city is totally dependent on the farmer. And the urban dweller is taking the farmer for granted. And the farmer, in many cases, are not talking to the city dweller. So this is a marriage that's not working very well. But they can't get divorced. So it's about finding out how you make people care about farming.
And I can continue.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
As I found in 2004-5 it is important for policymakers to reflect what is going on in the world. And we thought, because we also have fundings, we support projects. We have done that the last 20 years, and we decided that a part of our money should go to urban agriculture projects. So it was like putting small seeds all around in the Oslo area, and I think we have succeeded because a lot of this has it's like a snowball rolled on and getting bigger. And we also, with our strategy in 2014, we wanted to kick Oslo municipality a little bit on the leg to curb up the work with urban agriculture. And with supporting all these projects, they could start working. How do they get? Of course, the grassroots is working, but with money, it goes faster. And for policymakers, it's important to see what's going on in the society and reflect that. But it's not always. It's a big competition between different teams, and we have to continue with putting, the urban farming on a higher level to make the journalists write about all the good projects, or giving money for more research to increase the knowledge about how important it is.
Yep.
So it's about the opinion. I agree. We have to to make people to see how important it is.
Also,
And we need food, and we can produce food in the city too.
Also, I found a really useful thing to also remember is that people like to be happy.
Mm.
So if you're able to get people together and make people happy, then they will change gladly.
Sorry.
This crisis and impending doom, it's important to remember.
But the biggest challenge I see when I talk to farmers around our area is the economy. The pandemic has been very tough on them. I spoke to a woman who was selling to Horeca, and she said, now after the pandemic, where it was terrible, they didn't get use of the meat to the Horeca, so they have to try to sell it to all the private customers. Now Horeca has started to use less meat because the price has increased. So it's always a question of prices and the economy of the farmer. And the farmer I visited yesterday, who has started market gardening, they say they don't think they will earn anything on market gardening, but on other types of work they are doing in the civil society. Yeah.
Well, that's lovely, Chris.
I just had to continue or take a step back in terms of collaboration, right? It's one thing is about understanding. When you talk about climate change around food, it's complex, right? Where do you start and how do you measure it? So I think it's one thing. All the players who are in, like existing and new, and also policy, they need to sit together and find a common understanding, right? Because that we see that most of the players within local food, or they try and find their own ways of measuring, right? Everything should be their own ways, and they push that agenda, and then everything is just lost. So the consumer at the end don't really understand anything. And for working with municipalities and the official, like the governmental side in Norway, we've at least had a lot of issues. So for Dagens, one of the issues that we've seen historically for large players like hotels, like canteens serving thousands of people, is to have aggregation. So like local producers can actually supply 200 kilos of X and Y. It's predictability, because you can't have a canteen serving 2,500 people and the farmer said, by the way, I couldn't, it was I need to actually be delivering. And it's information, right? You need to understand exactly what's expected, price. It's a bit of a structure. So for Dagens, we've been working a lot on that side. So last year we facilitated almost 300 tons of produce locally. And we're now working with big canteens in Oslo and Copenhagen. We're the main supplier of Øya Festival, which we supply tens of tons in 2 days. So we have this supply chain and an information chain which is working. That's also what's interesting in Denmark, is that in 3 weeks we were able to work with the municipality. because they have a different policy setup.
Mhm.
And they have also local or people within the kitchens who currently really want to use local food. And we've been working with Oslo municipality, talking with them for 4 years. Zero, right? Nothing. Yeah, we try and kick it the ways, but what's interesting now is that we don't really work towards kind of public procurement, but we have more and more municipalities coming to us for kind of collaboration. And that's really interesting when you see like this collaboration between public and private and finding a way to work together. Because one of the main issues that also we see is that everyone wants to do it themselves. I had a presentation to a group of farmers, I think it was around 2 hours east of Oslo, which was set up by the local municipality. And I called the agent from the municipality the week afterwards, and I said, how's it going? Are you going to start using Dagens at the platform? Said, no, we want to do it ourselves. Okay, well, where are you going to get funding then for a year, and then you lose your funding, and then what? It's like our chief developer, he says, it's called development for a reason. You never stop, right? So you might pay 200,000 for this infrastructure, this webpage, and then it's 50,000 the next year, and then it's 20,000 because it's always costs, right? So yeah, but the main thing it's collaboration. That's why arenas like this is great.
That's lovely. Thank you. Now, Freudis may have been scratching her ear.
Yeah, it has been touched upon since I raised my hand, but I guess I can share a comment, and it's partly a question to Christopher and Randi, maybe, because I thought Sebastian did an interesting exercise at looking into the strategies, and you managed to find the farmers after digging a bit in the Bergman, but it was very little about how to facilitate or encourage markets, or how to create these marketplaces and connect. I wanted then to back to kind of the role of public authorities, and I'm curious. I was curious when I read those strategies that it had. I feel you really have to struggle to say that it says anything about that in the local ones, and I'm curious to what extent you work towards public authorities. Or how you see that they can play a role in facilitating more the market part of coming into the city, and to what extent you do that, or expectations you have, or if it's really the public authorities' role to work on that. Yeah.
Well, first of all, it's very often we experience that they don't think about us, because we don't have a lot of people working in the farmers market. We have 2 full-time people. It's me, national level, and the person working in Oslo. The rest of the people are part-time or volunteers, and that means that if the Oslo municipality is thinking about ideas and maybe inviting the people they know from before into some workshop or whatever, very often they will not think about us, because we don't have possibility to go to a lot of seminars and meetings and to call them every second day so we can help them to remember that we are there and that we have the contacts that we have. So, and that will be the same in the rest of the country as well. So, so this kind of bubbles you get, and this kind of also like the teams in the municipalities are not even talking to each other. So it's very, sometimes it's not very, they should try to expand their network and to be work better when it comes to connect to the people who are actually doing things, working on this. So that would be nice to and maybe easier if the people making the plans sitting by their desks, because some of these people behind the desks, they don't have a lot of contacts in the field. Some of them have. So it's a huge difference between them on how very much contact they have with the farmers and the different umbrellas working in this field.
Okay, thank you. I've got people. The person who's waved his finger at me who has ultimate authority now is Sebastian. We've run out of time, sadly. So we've used our hour, I think, really, really well. And so thank you very much to everybody's participation. I think I love the idea that this is a relationship, maybe not a marriage, because that kind of implies all sorts of other connections. But, you know, it's a relationship, and it's a relationship that sometimes we misunderstand each other. And if the only thing we talk about is our shared bank balance, it's going to be a very shallow and difficult relationship. Just as a quick personal relationship tip, to try and avoid talking about only that. But that's what we do with food. So often we only talk about money. And as we've reflected this afternoon, it's much, much more complicated than that. It requires almost all of us to change simultaneously. And we need to have a dialogue and a sensitive kind of collaboration about how we do that. We are, of course, perfectly capable of doing it. But it's actually not going to be a smooth process. I think we have a huge amount of ideas, we have a huge amount of energy and a huge amount of goodwill, not only towards each other, but also towards people who will become part of this discussion, who are not yet part of it, but will become part of it. Many of those people are keen to do so. So I'm very energized and excited. I know the conversation is going to go on. I know Rose particularly wanted to say something, but we've run out of time. So thank you very much to all our panelists who've come quite a long way and made quite a lot of effort to be here to make their contributions. And we're really grateful to them. So thank you very much.